9-year-old Sarah's ocean blue eyes no longer sparkled. They once crinkled at the corners when she laughed, a sound that had become increasingly rare in the household. The change hadn't happened overnight. Like erosion on a coastline, Sarah's vibrant spirit had been slowly wearing away, almost imperceptibly at first, then with alarming speed. The three-bedroom colonial in Columbus, Ohio's neighborhood had once been filled with weekend pancake breakfasts, impromptu living room dance parties, and the steady hum of a family that, while not perfect, functioned with love at its core. That was before found-the-text messages, before the arguments that leaked through Sarah's bedroom walls despite her parents' attempts to shield her, before the night asked Michael to leave. The divorce proceedings had been swift but brutal. Michael, at 42, had cultivated an impeccable public image. As the regional director for a pharmaceutical company, he donated generously to local charities, coached youth soccer on weekends, and maintained friendships with several judges on the Franklin County bench. His attorney had painted as emotionally unstable, pointing to her history with anxiety medication as evidence she was an unfit primary caregiver. "Your Honor," Michael had said during the initial hearing, his voice carrying the practiced sincerity that had served him well in corporate boardrooms, "I only want what's best for Sarah's episodes. They frighten our daughter. She needs stability." Protests that her prescribed anxiety medication was precisely what made her stable fell on seemingly deaf ears. Nevertheless, the judge awarded her primary custody, with Michael receiving visitation every other weekend and Wednesday evenings. It was a standard arrangement that satisfied no one. The problems began 3 months after the divorce was finalized. Sarah would return from weekends with her father subdued, sometimes with mysterious bruises on her arms or legs. "I fell at the playground," she would say, or "I bumped into the coffee table." Plausible explanations, but the haunted look in her eyes told a different story. Noticed other changes, too. Sarah, once an enthusiastic artist, began drawing disturbing scenes, dark figures looming over smaller ones, houses with jagged lines like wounds cutting through them. Her kindergarten teacher called, concerned about Sarah's withdrawal from friends and her startled reactions to loud noises or sudden movements. "Has there been any significant change at home?" the teacher had asked delicately. Explained the divorce, but didn't mention her growing suspicion that something was happening during Sarah's visits with Michael. She had no proof, and Michael's sterling reputation made accusations dangerous. One careless allegation could result in her losing custody entirely. The breaking point came on a Sunday evening in April. Michael had returned Sarah 3 hours late, offering a casual apology about losing track of time. After he left, Sarah refused to eat dinner, curling into herself on the couch, flinching when tried to stroke her hair. "Sweetheart, did something happen at Daddy's house?" asked, keeping her voice even despite the dread pooling in her stomach. Sarah's lower lip trembled. "I can't tell you," she whispered. "He said nobody would believe me anyway because I'm just a kid. He said they'd take me away from you if I told." His heart hammered against her ribs. With gentle coaxing, Sarah revealed fragments of the truth. Michael's explosive anger when she spilled juice on his laptop, how he'd gripped her arms so tightly they bruised, the names he called her when she cried. That night, after Sarah finally fell asleep, made 2 phone calls. The first was to Dr. Michaels, a child psychologist recommended by Sarah's pediatrician. The second was to a family law attorney known for handling difficult custody cases. Dr. Michaels saw Sarah 3 times before confirming what feared. Sarah was showing clear signs of emotional and possibly physical abuse. "Children rarely fabricate specific details of abuse," Dr. Michaels explained during a private consultation. "Sarah's descriptions are consistent with a child who's experienced trauma." "But will it be enough for court?" asked, twisting a tissue between her fingers. "Michael will deny everything. He'll say I coached her." Dr. Michaels' expression was grave. "Unfortunately, Family courts often struggle with these situations, especially when the alleged abuser is as well-connected as your ex-husband. Children's testimony can be dismissed as unreliable or influenced by the other parent. It was Dr. Michaels who first suggested a service dog. There's a program that trains dogs specifically for children who experience trauma. The animals can provide emotional support, but they're also trained to respond to anxiety attacks and can sometimes serve as objective witnesses to a child's distress. The possibility kindled a fragile hope in. The following week, they visited Canine Companions for Healing, where they met Lily, a 2-year-old golden retriever with intelligent eyes and a gentle demeanor. The trainer explained that Lily had been specially selected for her intuitive response to human emotions and her protective instincts. She's not aggressive, clarified, but she's been trained to recognize signs of fear and distress. She can provide comfort, but more importantly, she can serve as a buffer between Sarah and perceived threats. When Sarah knelt to greet Lily, the connection was immediate. The dog pressed her muzzle gently against Sarah's chest, as if listening to her heartbeat, then settled beside her, a warm, steady presence. For the first time in months, Sarah smiled, a real smile that reached her eyes. The training program would take 6 weeks. Sarah attended sessions 3 evenings a week, learning specific commands and signals. Sarah proved an apt pupil, especially when it came to the silent hand signals that could direct Lily without spoken commands. "This one means stay close," demonstrated, showing Sarah how to curl her fingers in a subtle motion. "And this one tells Lily you're feeling scared and need protection." Sarah practiced diligently, forming a bond with Lily that deepened with each session. By the time they completed the program, Lily responded to Sarah's signals with remarkable precision. The night they brought Lily home permanently, Sarah slept through the night for the first time in months. Michael's reaction to the dog was immediate and furious. When he arrived for his Wednesday visitation and saw Lily, his carefully maintained facade cracked. "What the hell is this?" he demanded, standing on the porch, refusing to enter the house where Lily watched alertly from Sarah's side. "She's a service dog for Sarah," explained, keeping her voice calm despite the familiar flutter of fear in her chest. "Her doctor recommended it." Michael's eyes narrowed. "You're unbelievable," he hissed, low enough that Sarah couldn't hear from inside. "First the therapy, now this. You're determined to make our daughter think there's something wrong with her. That dog is not coming to my house." Sarah, hearing the tension in her father's voice, had made the stay close signal to Lily. The dog positioned herself firmly beside the child, a golden sentinel. It was the first visitation Michael had ever voluntarily missed. 2 days later was served with papers. Michael was suing for full custody, claiming was emotionally manipulating their daughter and alienating her from her father through unnecessary psychological interventions and the introduction of a disruptive animal. The battle lines were drawn, with Sarah and Lily caught in the middle of a storm that was about to break over the Franklin County family court. The golden retriever arrived on Sarah's birthday, not just any dog, but a specially trained service animal for trauma survivors. The timing wasn't coincidental. Had arranged everything meticulously, hoping the joy of a new companion might overshadow the fact that Michael had canceled his planned birthday visit with their daughter, claiming a last-minute business emergency. When the doorbell rang that Saturday morning, Sarah opened it to find the trainer from Canine Companions for Healing, standing on their porch with Lily sitting obediently at his side, a bright blue ribbon around her neck. "Happy birthday," Sarah said, smiling as he handed over Lily's leash. "Someone special is ready to come home with you today." Sarah stood frozen, her mouth forming a perfect O of surprise before dropping to her knees on the welcome mat. Lily approached with gentle dignity, her warm brown eyes never leaving Sarah's face. When the dog pressed her muzzle against Sarah's cheek, a gesture they would later learn was one of Lily's specialized greetings, tears spilled down the girl's face. "She's really mine," Forever, Sarah whispered, looking up at her mother with a vulnerability that made her heart ache. Forever and always, confirmed, signing the final adoption papers extended. She's been training just for you. Over coffee at the kitchen table, explained Lily's capabilities to, while Sarah led her new companion on a tour of the house, her voice drifting back to them with an animation that had been absent for months. Lily is what we call a multifunction service dog, explained, spreading a training manual on the table between them. She's primarily trained for emotional support and anxiety response, but she also has specialized training for trauma survivors. Nodded, glancing toward the living room where Sarah was showing Lily her collection of stuffed animals. What exactly does that entail? She can detect physiological changes that indicate anxiety or fear, increased heart rate, perspiration, shallow breathing. When she notices these signs, she's trained to provide tactile comfort by leaning against Sarah or laying her head in her lap. Flip through the manual to a section labeled Alert Behaviors. More importantly, she's trained to respond to specific signals that Sarah can give her if she feels threatened but isn't able to verbalize it. He demonstrated with his own hands, a subtle curling of the fingers, a quick tapping of index finger against thumb, a palm turned inward with fingers spread. We call these silent alerts. They're particularly useful in situations where verbal communication might escalate conflict. Thought immediately of Michael's quick temper, how Sarah had learned to go quiet in his presence. And what does Lily do when she receives these signals? It depends on the signal and the situation, replied. For mild anxiety, she'll simply stay close and provide comfort. For more acute distress, he hesitated, choosing his words carefully. She's trained to position herself between Sarah and the perceived threat. Not aggressively, but as a physical barrier. She'll also perform visible alert behaviors that can signal to others that Sarah is in distress. Like what? Asked. She might whine, paw at the ground, or even give a short bark, behaviors that would be recognized by anyone familiar with service animals as indicating that something is wrong. Close the manual. These aren't attack behaviors. Lily isn't trained to be aggressive, but she is trained to be protective in a way that draws attention to situations where her handler might be in danger. That afternoon, after left, watched as Sarah and Lily began to bond. The transformation in her daughter was remarkable. Sarah's movements, which had become hesitant and self-conscious in recent months, grew more confident with Lily beside her. Her voice, often reduced to whispers, rang out in delighted laughter when Lily performed tricks or responded to commands. At bedtime, Lily seemed to instinctively understand her role. When Sarah patted the bed beside her, the dog jumped up and settled against her side, a warm, steady presence. Lingered in the doorway, watching as Sarah's eyelids grew heavy. "Mom," Sarah murmured, already half asleep, "I feel safe with Lily." 4 simple words that confirmed had made the right decision, whatever legal battles might lie ahead. The training sessions intensified over the next several weeks. 3 evenings a week would arrive to work with Sarah and Lily, teaching them to function as a team. Sarah proved an apt pupil, especially when it came to the silent hand signals. "This one means stay close," demonstrated, showing Sarah how to curl her fingers in a subtle motion against her thigh. "You'd use this in situations where you're feeling a little nervous but not scared." Sarah practiced, her small fingers mimicking the gesture until Lily responded perfectly, moving to press against her leg. "And this one," continued, demonstrating a different signal, "tells Lily you're feeling truly scared and need protection." This signal was more deliberate, a palm held low at the side, fingers spread with a slight tremor. When Sarah practiced it, Lily's response was immediate and dramatic. The dog moved to position herself squarely between Sarah, and her posture alert but not aggressive, her eyes fixed on the trainer with watchful intensity. "Wow," Sarah breathed, looking at with wide eyes. She really understood. "She's been specially trained to recognize that as a serious alert," explained. In a real situation, she would maintain that position until you gave her a release signal or until the perceived threat was gone. One evening, after a particularly successful training session, took aside while Sarah played with Lily in the backyard. "She's doing remarkably well," he said, watching through the window as Sarah threw a ball for Lily to retrieve. "Their bond is developing faster than I expected." "She's like a different child," agreed. "Her nightmares have almost stopped, and her therapist says she's making real progress." Nodded, his expression turning serious. "I need to ask about the court situation. Have you informed your ex-husband about Lily?" Sighed, rubbing her temples where a tension headache was forming. "He knows. He's furious. Refuses to have Lily at his house during visitation." "That's going to be a problem," said quietly. "Separation from a service animal can trigger setbacks in trauma recovery. Legally, Sarah has the right to have Lily with her in most settings, including school, public spaces, and yes, during visitation with her other parent." "Try telling Michael that," said bitterly. "He's already filed for modification of the custody agreement. His attorney is arguing that I'm using the dog as a tool to alienate Sarah from him." His expression hardened. "I've worked with enough trauma survivors to recognize the patterns here. If your ex-husband is resistant to the service animal, it's often because he understands that the dog will respond to his behavior in ways he can't control." The implications hung in the air between them, unspoken but clear. That night, after Sarah had fallen asleep with Lily curled protectively around her, sat at the kitchen table reviewing the legal documents had prepared. The custody hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks away. Michael's legal team had submitted affidavits from colleagues, neighbors, and even Sarah's soccer coach, all testifying to his exemplary parenting. His case rested on documentation from Dr. Michaels, Sarah's therapist, and now, his professional assessment of Sarah's need for Lily. It felt flimsy against Michael's community standing and financial resources, but as she peeked in on her sleeping daughter, drew strength from the sight of Lily's watchful presence. For the first time since the divorce, they had an ally, one whose loyalty couldn't be bought or intimidated. What couldn't know was how crucial that loyalty would prove to be in the Franklin County courtroom, where the truth would finally emerge in a moment that would leave everyone, including the judge, in total shock. "I'm filing for full custody," Michael announced, his attorney serving papers claiming was emotionally destabilizing their daughter with unnecessary psychological interventions. The legal document landed on his kitchen table with the weight of a bomb, its carefully worded accusations cutting through her like shrapnel. The filing was meticulous and damning. It characterized as increasingly erratic, cited her history with anxiety medication as evidence of psychological instability, and portrayed her decision to obtain a service dog for Sarah as an attempt to pathologize normal childhood behaviors in order to alienate the child from her father. Most disturbing was the request for an emergency hearing, claiming that Sarah's emotional well-being was in immediate jeopardy under her mother's care. His hands trembled as she reached for her phone to call. The attorney answered on the second ring. "He's going nuclear," said, her voice barely steady. "Full custody, emergency hearing, accusations of psychological manipulation." "I'm not surprised," replied, her tone professionally calm but with an undercurrent of concern. "Send me the documents immediately. We need to prepare a comprehensive response." By that afternoon, sat in his downtown office, surrounded by law books and the subtle scent of brewing coffee. A formidable presence despite her petite frame, paced as she dictated notes to her assistant. At 45, she had built her reputation defending vulnerable clients against powerful opponents, her silver-streaked black hair and perpetually formal attire earning her the nickname, the Silver Sentinel, among courthouse regulars. "Michael's playing this exactly as I expected," said, settling behind her desk. "He's leveraging his public image and your medical history to paint himself as the stable parent." "But it's all backward," protested. "He's the one Sarah's afraid of. He's the reason she needs therapy and Lily." nodded, her expression grave. The problem is proving it. Family courts operate in a frustrating middle ground. They're meant to protect children, but they're also bound by evidentiary standards that make emotional and psychological abuse notoriously difficult to establish. She spread the custody modification papers on her desk, highlighting key passages with a yellow marker. His legal team is good. They're careful to avoid outright lies while spinning half-truths into a compelling narrative. For instance, they mention your anxiety medication but conveniently omit that it was prescribed following your mother's cancer diagnosis 3 years ago. Pressed her fingertips against her temples. What about Dr. Michael's assessment and reports about Sarah's progress with Lily? Those will be central to our defense, confirmed. But Michael's team will argue that Sarah's therapy and the service dog are your attempts to create evidence of trauma that doesn't exist. The following day, the local newspaper ran a story that made stomach turn. Executive CLAIMS ex-wife using service dog to alienate child. The article quoted sources close to the case, clearly fed by Michael's legal team, suggesting that was manufacturing a narrative of abuse to win sympathy from the court. Don't engage with the media, warned when called in a panic. Michael wants to provoke an emotional response he can use against you. We fight this in court, not in the press. Easier said than done. The article sparked a flurry of social media commentary from parents at Sarah's school. Some expressed support for, but others, particularly those in Michael's social circle, began to look at her with suspicion during school drop-offs and pickups. The principal called, concerned about disruption to the educational environment, and suggesting that perhaps Lily should remain at home rather than accompanying Sarah to class. Absolutely not, responded when consulted. The Americans with Disabilities Act explicitly protects Sarah's right to have her service animal with her at school. Send the principal the documentation from Dr. Michaels and inform her that any attempt to separate Sarah from Lily would constitute discrimination. The principal backed down, but the damage to his reputation in the community was spreading like a stain. Michael, meanwhile, was presenting himself as the reasonable, concerned father, telling mutual friends he was heartbroken that was using their daughter as a weapon in a personal vendetta. 3 weeks before the scheduled hearing, arranged for Sarah to meet with a court-appointed guardian ad, an attorney named Foster whose job was to represent Sarah's interests independently of either parent. Ms. Foster is good, assured. She's experienced in cases involving allegations of emotional abuse and won't be easily misled by Michael's charm. The meeting took place at his office, deliberately neutral territory. Waited anxiously in the reception area while Sarah spoke with privately, Lily at her side. After an hour that felt like an eternity, the office door opened. "Mom," Sarah called, running to with more animation than she'd shown in public for months. "Ms. Foster says Lily can stay with me during the whole court thing." Followed more sedately, her professional demeanor softened by a small smile. "Lily is clearly a legitimate service animal," she told, "and Sarah's attachment to her is both appropriate and beneficial." She glanced down at her notes. "I'll be recommending that Lily be permitted to accompany Sarah during her testimony, should that become necessary." It was a small victory, but clung to it as preparations for the hearing intensified. Worked tirelessly, gathering evidence and preparing witnesses. Dr. Michaels agreed to testify about Sarah's therapy progress and would speak to the legitimacy of Lily's service animal status and the specific behaviors she was trained to alert to. Michael's legal team responded by submitting additional character witnesses, his pastor, colleagues from the pharmaceutical company, even Sarah's soccer coach, all testifying to his exemplary parenting. They also retained a child psychologist who, without ever having met Sarah, prepared to testify that service animals could create dependency and reinforce anxiety patterns in children. A week before the hearing, Michael attempted a different approach. He called directly, his voice honey-smooth with reasonableness. "This has gotten out of hand," he said. "We're both spending money on lawyers that should be going to Sarah's college fund." Gripped the phone tightly, her pulse quickening. "What are you suggesting?" "A compromise," Michael replied. "I'll drop the custody modification request if you agree to phase out this service dog business. Sarah can keep seeing her therapist. I'll even pay for it, but the dog stays at your house during my visitation weekends." The offer was tempting in its promise to end the legal battle, but thought of Sarah's nightmares returning, of the bruises that appeared after weekends with Michael, of Lily's protective presence that had finally allowed her daughter to feel safe. "I can't agree to that," she said firmly. "Lily stays with Sarah." Michael's cracked instantly. "You'll regret this," he hissed. "When I'm done, you'll be lucky if you get supervised visitation. Everyone will see you for the unstable, manipulative bitch you really are." The line went dead. Sat motionless, the phone still pressed to her ear, a curious calm settling over her. In that moment of naked aggression, Michael had revealed his true nature, the same face Sarah saw behind closed doors. "He threatened me," told the next day, recounting the conversation. "Can we use that?" Shook her head regretfully. "Without a recording, it's your word against his, but it confirms what we already knew. He's feeling threatened by Lily's presence and what it represents." The night before the hearing found Sarah in her bedroom, kneeling beside Lily, the dog watching attentively as Sarah practiced hand signals. "What's that one for?" asked, noticing a gesture she didn't recognize, a subtle movement of fingers at waist level that wasn't part of Lily's standard command set. Sarah's eyes darted away. "It's our secret code," she whispered, "for when I'm too scared to talk." Lily's ears perked forward, her intelligent eyes fixed on Sarah's small hands. "Showed me how to make a special signal," Sarah continued. "If I get really scared tomorrow, I can tell Lily without saying anything." Knelt beside them, pulling Sarah into a gentle hug. "You're very brave," she murmured into her daughter's hair. "But remember, you only have to tell the truth tomorrow. That's all anyone can ask of you." As Sarah finally drifted to sleep, Lily, maintaining her protective vigil at the foot of the bed, stood in the doorway, watching them. Tomorrow would determine their future, whether Sarah would be protected from Michael's subtle cruelty or delivered directly into his hands, whether his instincts as a mother would be validated or used as evidence against her. Everything hinged on what would happen in Judge Watson's courtroom, where the truth would finally emerge in a moment that none of them could anticipate. Sarah practiced testifying with while Lily remained by her side, the golden retriever's warm presence a steady anchor in the sterile conference room of law office. 3 days before the hearing, they were conducting what called simulation, a mock courtroom scenario designed to prepare Sarah for the real thing. "Remember," explained gently, "Judge Watson might ask you questions directly, or the attorneys might. You don't have to memorize answers. Just tell the truth about how you feel." Sarah nodded, her small fingers absently stroking Lily's fur. "What if I can't speak when I see him?" she whispered, the tremble in her voice betraying her anxiety. "Sometimes when Daddy gets that look, my words just disappear." Exchanged a meaningful glance with, who sat quietly in the corner, trying to project calm despite the knot of dread in her stomach. This was precisely what they feared, that Sarah would freeze under Michael's intimidating presence, unable to articulate the subtle emotional abuse she endured during visitations. "That's why we have Lily," reminded her, gesturing to the dog. "Remember your signals with her. If you're feeling scared or can't find your words, you can use those special signals taught you. Lily will understand even if you can't say it out loud." Sarah's small hand practiced the motion, a subtle gesture that would be barely noticeable to observers but was unmistakable to the highly trained service animal. Lily's ears perked forward attentively, recognizing the silent communication. "What exactly will Lily do if Sarah gives that signal?" asked later, after Sarah had gone to use the bathroom. Lily padding faithfully behind her. His expression was carefully neutral. Briefed me yesterday. The signal Sarah's practicing is what they call a danger alert. If she gives it, Lily is trained to position herself between Sarah and the perceived threat and display visible alerting behaviors, not aggression, but unmistakable protective positioning. And that's admissible, the dog's reaction. Tapped her pen thoughtfully against her legal pad. That's where it gets interesting. Service animals are legally recognized extensions of their handlers. Lily's trained responses are considered legitimate assistance for Sarah's diagnosed anxiety condition. If Lily alerts in court, it cannot be dismissed as irrelevant, particularly since we have expert testimony establishing the scientific basis for her training. Nodded slowly. Michael will say I trained her to react that way, that it's all orchestrated. He can say that, agreed, but we have to testify that these reactions cannot be. They're responses to physiological changes that Sarah can't fake, even if she wanted to. While Sarah prepared with, Michael's powerful legal team was assembling an impressive array of character witnesses. Through courthouse connections, learned they had subpoenaed Sarah's teachers, Michael's pastor, colleagues from the pharmaceutical company, neighbors, and even Sarah's soccer coach, all prepared to testify to Michael's exemplary parenting and community standing. It's quantity over quality, assured when she reported this news. Judge Watson is too experienced to be swayed by a parade of witnesses who have only seen Michael's public face. Still, the pressure was mounting. Had mortgaged her house to cover legal fees, while Michael's corporate position allowed him to absorb the costs without financial strain. The press continued to cover the case, with subtle bias toward Michael's narrative of a vindictive ex-wife using psychological tactics to alienate a child from her father. 2 days before the hearing, an unexpected complication arose. Michael's legal team filed an emergency motion to exclude Lily from the courtroom, claiming her presence would prejudice the proceedings and potentially influence the child's testimony. The motion cited cases where therapy animals had been excluded from courtrooms on similar grounds. Worked through the night preparing their response, citing the Americans with Disabilities Act, recent precedents regarding service animals in court, and affidavits from both Dr. Michaels and regarding Sarah's legitimate need for Lily's assistance. Judge Watson ruled on the motion the following afternoon. Lily would be permitted to accompany Sarah in court, but with specific limitations. The dog would need to remain in a designated position, wear a clearly visible service vest, and if she displayed any disruptive behavior, she could be removed at the judge's discretion. It's a compromise, explained to a relieved. Not perfect, but workable. The important thing is that Sarah won't have to face this alone. The evening before the hearing, tried to maintain a sense of normalcy at home. She prepared Sarah's favorite dinner, macaroni and cheese with hot dogs cut into octopus shapes, and suggested they watch a movie together. But Sarah was withdrawn, pushing food around her plate and responding to questions with single words. After dinner, found Sarah in her bedroom, kneeling beside Lily on the colorful alphabet rug that was a remnant from her preschool days. Sarah's hands moved in deliberate patterns as she practiced the silent signals, Lily watching with focused attention. "We need to get a good night's sleep," said gently from the doorway. "Tomorrow's a big day." Sarah didn't look up. What if the judge says I have to live with Daddy? What if they take Lily away? Knelt beside her daughter, carefully maintaining her own composure despite the fear that question stirred. Judge Watson's job is to decide what's best for you. That's why it's so important that you tell the truth tomorrow, about how you feel at Daddy's house, about the things that scare you, about how Lily helps you. Sarah nodded solemnly, then demonstrated another hand signal, one hadn't seen before. It was subtle, almost like a nervous fidget. Fingers briefly extended at waist level, then curled inward against the palm. "What's that one for?" asked. Sarah's eyes darted away. "It's our secret code for when I'm too scared to talk," she whispered. "Showed me how to make a special signal. If I get really scared tomorrow, I can tell Lily without saying anything." The implication hung in the air between them. Sarah was anticipating a moment of such fear that words would fail her. Felt a chill despite the warm spring evening. "You don't need to be afraid of telling the truth," she assured her daughter, though her own confidence wavered. Michael had always been adept at presenting himself as reasonable while making subtle threats only Sarah could recognize. Later that night, after Sarah had finally fallen asleep with Lily curled protectively at her feet, sat at the kitchen table reviewing their case one final time. Had been meticulous in her preparation, but so much depended on Sarah's testimony that might never materialize if Michael succeeded in intimidating her into silence. Meanwhile, across town in his luxury condominium, Michael was also preparing for court. His attorney, James, had coached him extensively on projecting the image of a concerned, loving father, unjustly separated from his daughter by an unstable ex-wife. "Remember," had advised during their final preparation session, "no matter what accusations are made, maintain your composure. Your demeanor is as important as your testimony. Judge Watson will be watching how you react, not just what you say." Michael had nodded, his practiced smile never reaching his eyes. "I understand the game," he'd replied. "I've been closing million-dollar deals with skeptical clients for 20 years. I know how to make people believe me." What neither he nor his high-priced legal team anticipated was the silent language developing between a traumatized 9-year-old and her golden retriever, a language that would ultimately speak louder than any testimony or character witness. As dawn broke on the day of the hearing, both parents prepared for battle. Laid out Sarah's favorite outfit, a blue dress with yellow sunflowers, and packed Lily's service vest and water bowl. Michael selected his most conservative suit and had his assistant prepare press statements for what he anticipated would be a favorable outcome. Neither realized that the most powerful evidence in the case wouldn't come from expert witnesses, psychological evaluations, or legal arguments, but from the instinctive reaction of a service animal trained to recognize fear, a reaction that would shock everyone in the courtroom and change the course of their lives forever. Judge Watson's courtroom fell silent as Sarah entered with Lily. The Franklin County Family Court was housed in an imposing limestone building in downtown Columbus, its wood-paneled courtrooms designed to inspire respect for the legal process. Courtroom 302, where Judge Watson presided, was no exception. High ceilings, polished oak furnishings, and the subtle scent of lemon polish that couldn't quite mask the underlying tension of families in crisis. At precisely 9:30 a.m., the bailiff called the custody modification case. Michael sat at the front table beside his attorney, James, both in impeccable suits that probably cost more than his monthly mortgage payment. Michael had positioned himself to be visible to Sarah as she entered, his expression a perfect blend of paternal concern and gentle encouragement. And sat at the opposing table, his navy dress a deliberate choice to project stability and seriousness. The gallery behind them was filled with spectators, some friends there for support, others merely courthouse regulars drawn to high-profile custody battles, and in the back row, a reporter from the local newspaper, notebook poised. "All rise for the Honorable Judge Watson," the bailiff announced. Judge Watson entered with a brisk efficiency that characterized her courtroom. At 62, she had presided over family court for nearly 2 decades, her salt-and-pepper hair cut in a practical bob, her gaze sharp behind rectangular glasses. Known for her no-nonsense approach and child-centered rulings, she was respected and sometimes feared by family law attorneys throughout the county. "Be seated," she instructed, settling behind the bench and opening the case file. "V. Petition for modification of custody." Her gaze swept the courtroom, noting Sarah and Lily seated in the first row behind. I see we have the minor child present with her service animal, as previously authorized. Michael's attorney stood immediately. Your Honor, we would like to renew our objection to the presence of the dog. This is an unnecessary theatrical element that may unduly influence the proceedings. Judge Watson's expression remained impassive. Your objection is noted and overruled, Counselor. The court has already ruled on this matter. The service animal may remain so long as it causes no disruption. Her gaze shifted to Sarah. Young lady, please make sure your dog remains quiet and in place during these proceedings. Can you do that? Sarah nodded solemnly, her small hand resting on Lily's head. Verbal responses for the record, please, Judge Watson reminded her gently. Yes, Your Honor, Sarah whispered, barely audible. Very well, opening statements then. Mr. As the petitioner, you may begin. Michael's attorney rose with practiced confidence. For the next 15 minutes, he painted a compelling picture of a concerned father being systematically alienated from his child through what he termed psychological manipulation by the service dog, he argued, was part of a pattern of pathologizing normal childhood behaviors to create an artificial narrative of trauma. The evidence will show, concluded, that Michael is a loving, attentive father whose only desire is to provide a stable, healthy environment for his daughter, an environment free from the constant suggestion that she is damaged or in need of protection from imagined threats. His opening statement was equally pointed. She characterized Michael as a man with two faces, the charming, successful executive he presented to the world, and the controlling, emotionally volatile father Sarah experienced in private. The evidence will show, countered, that Sarah's anxiety, nightmares, and emotional withdrawal began after visitations with her father. The service dog, Lily, was recommended by licensed professionals as a legitimate intervention for a child showing clear signs of trauma. Far from being a tool of parental alienation, Lily represents Sarah's best chance at healing from the emotional harm she has suffered. Judge Watson listened attentively to both statements, her expression revealing nothing. Thank you, counsel. Mr. Call your first witness. The morning proceeded with Michael's carefully curated character witnesses. His pastor spoke of his generous donations to the church's youth program, his division manager to his balanced work-life priorities, noting he never missed important meetings, despite his challenging custody situation. Sarah's soccer coach described him as the model team parent who never missed a game and always brought snacks for the entire team. Cross-examinations were pointed but measured, establishing that none of these witnesses had observed Michael's interactions with Sarah in private, unsupervised settings. By lunchtime, the parade of character witnesses had established Michael's public persona, but offered little insight into his actual parenting. After the lunch recess, it was Michael's turn to testify. He took the stand with confident ease, his testimony in presenting himself as the reasonable party. He expressed deep concern about changes in Sarah's behavior that he attributed to influence. She used to run to me when I picked her up for visitation, Michael, his voice breaking slightly for effect. Now she clings to that dog and barely speaks to me. When I ask about her week, she looks to her mother before answering, as if checking what she's allowed to say. Cross-examination was surgical, focusing on specific incidents reported by Sarah, times when Michael had lost his temper, made disparaging comments about, or used fear as a control tactic. Michael each accusation with wounded dignity, suggesting that Sarah might be confused or coached to misinterpret normal parental discipline. By mid-afternoon, Judge Watson turned her attention to the expert witnesses. Dr. Michaels about Sarah's therapy progress, describing symptoms consistent with emotional abuse and the improvement she'd observed since Lily entered Sarah's life. The service dog trainer explained Lily's specialized training in responding to anxiety and fear triggers. Michael's legal team had retained their own child psychologist, Dr. Peter, who that service animals could create unhealthy dependency in children and potentially reinforce anxiety rather than alleviating it. On cross-examination, established that Doctor had never met Sarah or Lily, and his opinions were theoretical rather than based on direct observation. As the day wore on, Judge Watson consulted her notes, then looked up at the gallery where Sarah sat with Lily. "It's getting late, and I believe we need to hear from Sarah herself. However, I'm concerned about her endurance at this point in the day," she addressed Michael directly. "Would either parent object to continuing her testimony first thing tomorrow morning? I believe fresh minds would serve everyone's interests." Both parents agreed, and Judge Watson adjourned court until 9:00 a.m. the following day. That evening tried to maintain a normal routine at home, but Sarah was quieter than usual, picking at her dinner and retreating early to her bedroom with Lily. When went to check on her, she found Sarah practicing her hand signals again, her expression solemn. "You did great today," assured her, sitting on the edge of the bed. "Judge Watson seemed really nice, didn't she?" Sarah nodded without enthusiasm. "Daddy kept looking at me," she whispered. "He had that smile that means he's really angry inside." His heart clenched, recognizing the astute observation from a child who had learned to read subtle danger signals. "Tomorrow, just tell the truth," she said, repeating guidance. "That's all anyone can ask of you." Across town, Michael was having drinks with his attorney, reviewing the day's testimony. "The judge seemed receptive to our witnesses," observed, swirling his scotch. "But tomorrow will be critical. If Sarah appears fearful or distressed while testifying, it could undermine our position." Michael's expression hardened momentarily before he smoothed it into a confident smile. "Sarah knows better than to embarrass me in public," he said, his tone casual but carrying an undercurrent that made even his experienced attorney glance up sharply. "She'll say what she's supposed to say." The following morning dawned clear and bright, a spring day that belied the tension mounting in courtroom 302. Judge Watson had cleared her docket to focus exclusively on Sarah's testimony, recognizing its central importance to the case. "Good morning," Judge Watson greeted Sarah kindly as she took the witness seat, Lily settling at her feet. "I know this might seem scary, but we're just here to listen to you today. There are no right or wrong answers, only your truth. Do you understand?" Sarah nodded, then remembered to add, "Yes, Your Honor." "Very good. Now I'm going to ask you some questions, and then the attorneys might have questions too. If you don't understand something, just say so and we'll try again. All right." "All right," Sarah echoed, her voice small in the hushed courtroom. No one could have predicted that within minutes, this careful judicial proceeding would be thrown into disarray by a silent signal, and a golden retriever's unforgettable response, a moment that would leave everyone, including the unflappable Judge Watson, in total shock. "Does your father ever make you feel afraid?" asked gently. The question hung in the air of courtroom 302, the culmination of nearly an hour of careful questioning that had gradually led Sarah through descriptions of her life at both parents' homes. Judge Watson had allowed to question Sarah first, after which Michael's attorney would have his opportunity for cross-examination. Sarah sat in the witness chair, her feet barely touching the floor, Lily positioned loyally at her side as permitted by the court's special accommodation. The golden retriever had remained perfectly behaved throughout the proceedings, her presence so unobtrusive that even Judge Watson had commented favorably during a brief recess. For most of her testimony, Sarah had answered in short, hesitant responses, her voice barely audible despite the courtroom microphone. She described weekends at her father's condominium in neutral terms, the guest bedroom decorated with butterfly wallpaper, the park they sometimes visited, the pancakes he made on Sunday mornings. On the surface, these details painted a picture of normal, even pleasant visitations. But observant eyes might have noticed subtle signs of distress whenever the questions approached sensitive areas. Sarah's right hand would drift down to stroke Lily's fur, her shoulders would hunch slightly, and her responses would become even more abbreviated. These subtle physical signals weren't lost on Dr. Michaels, who sat in the gallery taking careful notes, nor on Judge Watson, whose decades of experience had attuned her to the unspoken language of traumatized children. At direct question about fear, Sarah glanced nervously at Michael, who maintained a calm, concerned expression from his seat at the defense table. To most observers, he appeared to be a worried father watching his child struggle through a difficult proceeding. But Sarah saw what others didn't: the almost imperceptible tightening around his eyes, the slight downward turn at the corners of his mouth that she had learned to recognize as warning signs of his displeasure. "Sarah," Judge Watson prompted gently when the silence stretched too long, "you need to answer Ms. question. Does your father ever make you feel afraid?" Sarah's gaze dropped to her lap. "Sometimes," she whispered, the word barely captured by the microphone. Approached carefully, maintaining a non-threatening distance. "Can you tell us about those times? What happens that makes you feel afraid?" Sarah's breathing quickened slightly, her right hand now firmly buried in Lily's fur. "When he gets mad," she began, then stopped. "It's okay," encouraged. "Take your time." "When he gets mad," Sarah tried again, "his voice gets really quiet instead of loud, and his face changes." She glanced up briefly at her father, then quickly away. "He says I shouldn't tell anyone because no one would believe me anyway, that they'd think I was making it up or that Mom told me to say things." Michael shifted slightly in his seat, his attorney placing a cautionary hand on his arm. The movement, though subtle, drew Sarah's attention, and she visibly tensed. "Has your father ever hurt you?" asked, her tone remaining gentle despite the gravity of the question. Sarah's eyes widened, darting once more to Michael, who now stared directly at her with an intensity that seemed to fill the space between them. To most in the courtroom, he still appeared to be a concerned father, perhaps a bit stressed by the proceedings. But to Sarah, the message in his gaze was unmistakable, a silent warning she had seen too many times before. It was at this moment that Sarah made a decision. Her small hand dropped to her side, fingers forming the secret signal she'd practiced with Lily, the one meaning danger. It was a subtle gesture, fingers briefly extended at waist level, then curled inward against the palm, almost imperceptible to anyone not specifically watching for it. The reaction was immediate and extraordinary. Lily, who had been lying calmly at Sarah's feet throughout the testimony, suddenly rose to her full height. With fluid, purposeful movement, the golden retriever positioned herself directly between Sarah and Michael, her body forming a living barrier. Though she made no aggressive sounds, her posture shifted dramatically, head raised, ears forward, body tense and alert in a classic protective stance. Most remarkable was the dog's gaze, fixed unwaveringly on Michael, not with aggression but with unmistakable vigilance, as if identifying him specifically as the source of her handler's distress. Gasps erupted throughout the courtroom. Michael's attorney stood abruptly. "Your Honor, this is clearly a trained performance." "Be seated, counselor," Judge Watson commanded sharply, her attention focused entirely on the tableau before her. A frightened child, a protective service animal, and the unmistakable connection between them. Michael himself had gone rigid, his carefully maintained cracking momentarily as genuine anger flashed across his features. "That dog has been trained to make me look." "Mr. Judge Watson's gavel came down with decisive force. "You will remain silent unless addressed directly by this court." The courtroom had erupted into murmurs and movement. In the gallery, the service dog trainer was already on his feet, his professional demeanor giving way to urgency as he attempted to catch attention. Dr. Michaels was scribbling furiously in her notebook, documenting the interaction with clinical precision. "What on earth?" Judge Watson began, then collected herself quickly. Her decades on the bench had taught her to maintain control even in extraordinary circumstances. "This court is in recess," she announced, banging her gavel decisively. "Counsel for both parties, the guardian ad and the service animal specialist, will join me in chambers immediately. The child and her service animal are to remain in the witness room with court supervision. Everyone else will clear the courtroom." As the bailiff began ushering spectators out, Sarah remained frozen in the witness chair, her hand still buried in Lily's fur, the dog maintaining her protective position. Half rose from her seat, torn between rushing to her daughter and respecting the court's procedure. "Ms. Judge Watson addressed directly, her tone softening slightly. "You may accompany your daughter to the witness room. Court Officer Martinez will stay with you." The transformation in Michael was striking. The momentary crack in his composure had been sealed, replaced once again with the image of a concerned father bewildered by unfair proceedings. "Your Honor," he began, his voice carrying just the right note of reasonable protest, "surely you can see this has been orchestrated." Mr. Judge Watson interrupted, her voice carrying the full weight of judicial authority. "I advised you to remain silent, and I meant it. This court is in recess." In her 20 years on the bench, Judge Watson had presided over hundreds of contentious custody cases. She had seen parents weep, rage, manipulate, and occasionally even come to blows in her courtroom. But she had never witnessed anything like the silent communication between a frightened child and her service dog, or the unmistakable identification of a specific individual as the source of that fear. As she gathered her files and prepared to move to her chambers, Judge Watson allowed herself a brief glance back at Sarah, who was now being gently escorted from the courtroom by her mother and the court officer, Lily still positioned protectively between the child and her father. In that moment, the judge made a mental note to review the specific training protocols for trauma response service animals. Whatever had just occurred in her courtroom was no theatrical performance. It was a communication as clear as any testimony she had ever heard. In the witness room, Sarah finally broke her silence, burying her face in her mother's shoulder. "He was giving me the look," she whispered, her voice muffled. "The one that means I'll be in big trouble later." Held her daughter close, meeting the eyes of Court Officer Martinez over Sarah's head. The officer, a mother herself, gave an almost imperceptible nod of understanding. Something profound had just happened in courtroom 302, something that would shape the decisions to come. "What on earth?" Judge Watson began as gasps erupted throughout the courtroom. The golden retriever's transformation from calm service animal to alert protector had been so sudden and dramatic that even the most skeptical observers couldn't help but take notice. Judge Watson, known throughout the Franklin County legal community for her unflappable demeanor, found herself momentarily speechless. Judge Watson had seen almost everything in her 22 years on the family court bench. She had witnessed parents sobbing and raging, had ordered bailiffs to separate feuding spouses, had even once ducked as a frustrated father hurled a legal pad across the courtroom. But she had never seen anything quite like this. A service animal responding with unmistakable clarity to a silent signal from a frightened child. Regaining her composure with practiced efficiency, Watson banged her gavel decisively. "This court is in recess," she announced, her voice cutting through the growing murmurs. "Counsel for both parties, the guardian ad and the service animal specialist, will join me in chambers immediately. The child and her service animal are to remain in the witness room with court supervision. Everyone else will clear the courtroom." As the bailiff began ushering spectators out, Watson observed Michael with newfound scrutiny. His initial flash of anger had been quickly masked, replaced by an expression of injured reasonableness that might have been convincing if she hadn't witnessed that momentary crack in his facade. 20 years of observing human behavior in her courtroom had given Watson an almost preternatural ability to spot authenticity and its absence. In her chambers, a space that reflected her practical nature with its modest furnishings and walls lined with legal volumes rather than the ostentatious decor some judges preferred, Watson took her seat behind the desk and surveyed the assembled parties. and James, the opposing attorneys, sat stiffly on opposite sides. Foster, the guardian ad, positioned herself between them, her expression thoughtful. The service dog trainer stood near the door, his professional demeanor barely concealing his eagerness to speak. Mr. Watson began, getting straight to the point. Explain what we just witnessed. Stepped forward, his posture straightening. Your Honor, what you observed was a legitimate alert response from a trained service animal. Lily is specifically trained to recognize signs of distress in her handler, in this case, Sarah, and to respond with protective behaviors when signaled. Are you suggesting the dog was responding to a command from the child? Interrupted, his tone incredulous. This is exactly what we've been arguing, that the mother and her various experts have orchestrated this entire performance. Watson silenced him with a look. You'll have your turn, counselor. Please continue, mister. It wasn't just a command, Your Honor, explained. Service animals like Lily are trained to respond to legitimate physiological indicators of fear or anxiety. They can detect changes in heart rate, perspiration, breathing patterns, signs that can't be faked, especially by a child. The hand signal Sarah used was one we specifically developed during training to allow her to communicate when she's experiencing fear, but doesn't feel safe vocalizing it. Convenient, muttered, earning another sharp look from the judge. What's particularly notable, continued, undeterred, is that Lily positioned herself specifically as a barrier between Sarah and her father. Service animals are trained to respond to general environmental threats, but Lily's behavior indicated she was identifying a specific individual as the source of Sarah's distress. Watson turned to Foster. Ms. Foster, as guardian ad, what is your assessment? A seasoned family court attorney with a reputation for fierce child advocacy considered her words carefully. Your Honor, in my interactions with Sarah, I've observed significant anxiety when discussing her father. The child psychologist's reports indicate symptoms consistent with emotional trauma. What we witnessed today appears to corroborate those professional assessments in a way that's difficult to dismiss. This is absurd, interjected with more force. My client is being prejudiced by theatrical tactics involving an animal that's been specifically trained to react negatively to him. Mr. is a respected community member with no history of abuse allegations before this custody dispute began. Watson regarded him coolly. Mr., I've allowed considerable latitude in your characterizations, but let me be clear. I am not easily manipulated by theatrics, nor am I dismissive of evidence simply because it takes an unexpected form. The reaction we witnessed was extraordinary and warrants serious consideration. She turned to, Ms. Your perspective. Had been taking notes throughout the exchange, her calm demeanor a counterpoint to growing agitation. Your Honor, we didn't anticipate this specific scenario, but we're not surprised by it. Sarah has consistently reported feeling frightened in her father's presence, but has struggled to articulate exactly why, a common challenge for children experiencing subtle emotional abuse. Lily's response validates what Sarah has been trying to tell us. Watson nodded, then pressed a button on her desk phone. Nancy, please ask Dr. Michaels to join us. While they waited, she reviewed her notes from the case, occasionally glancing up to study the faces of those assembled in her chambers. Dr. Michaels arrived promptly, her clinical demeanor a steadying presence in the charged atmosphere. After being briefed on the purpose of the consultation, she offered her professional assessment. Children experiencing emotional abuse often develop a heightened sensitivity to subtle cues from their abuser, facial expressions, body language, tones of voice that others might not register as threatening. What's particularly insidious about this form of abuse is that it's nearly impossible to document in the traditional sense. There are no bruises, no recordings of verbal threats, just a child's internal experience, which is often dismissed as imagination or manipulation. And the dog's reaction, Watson asked. Animals, particularly those with specialized training, can detect physiological stress responses that humans might miss or discount, Dr. Michaels explained. Service animals like Lily are essentially objective witnesses to a child's genuine emotional state. They can't be coached to respond to invented fears. Watson absorbed this information, her judicial mind weighing evidence, precedent, and the best interests of the child at the center of this case. After a long moment, she reached a decision. "Here's what's going to happen," she announced with quiet authority. "We will resume court tomorrow morning. In the interim, I'm ordering a comprehensive evaluation of Sarah by an independent child psychologist from my approved list. This evaluation will include observed interactions with both parents, with Lily present." Began to protest, but Watson raised a hand to silence him. "Additionally, I'm appointing Dr. Reed as a special advisor to the court. Dr. Reed is both a veterinary behaviorist and a licensed psychologist who has worked extensively with service animals in therapeutic settings. He will observe and evaluate Lily's responses in controlled interactions." "Your Honor," tried again, "my client objects to further delays and to the introduction of yet another expert who will inevitably be biased by today's choreographed performance." "Your objection is noted, Counselor," Watson replied coolly, "and overruled. I'll also remind you that characterizing court-appointed experts as biased before they've even begun their work borders on contempt." She turned to Foster. "Ms. Foster, I'd like you to be present for all evaluations as Sarah's advocate. And the court would appreciate your expertise during Dr. Reed's assessment of Lily." Watson gathered her papers, signaling the end of the conference. "Until these evaluations are complete, I'm modifying the visitation schedule. Mr. may have supervised visitation only to take place at the Family Connection Center, with no discussion of the case permitted during these visits." "Judge Watson," protested, "there is absolutely no basis for restricting my client's parental rights based on a dog's behavior. This sets a dangerous precedent." "No, Counselor," Watson interrupted firmly. "What sets a dangerous precedent is dismissing evidence of a child's distress simply because it comes in an unconventional form. The temporary modification stands." As the attorneys filed out, Watson called back, "Ms. a word." When they were alone, the judge's formal demeanor softened slightly. "How is Sarah holding up?" Sighed, "She's exhausted, Your Honor. The emotional toll of these proceedings." "I understand," Watson interrupted gently. "I've been doing this long enough to recognize when a child is genuinely frightened versus when they've been coached. What I witnessed today was genuine fear and genuine protection from that service animal." She shuffled papers on her desk, then looked up with surprising candor. "In 20 years on this bench, I've regretted some decisions. Most often, it's the times I didn't intervene strongly enough when my instincts told me a child was in danger. I won't make that mistake here." As left to join Sarah in the witness room, Judge Watson sat alone in her chambers, reviewing her notes once more. In her career, she had seen countless parents fighting for custody, some for love, some for control, some simply to hurt their former partners. She had developed a finely tuned sense for distinguishing between them. Today, in a moment that had shocked her normally unshakable courtroom, a golden retriever named Lily had confirmed what her judicial instincts had already begun to suspect. Sarah was afraid of her father for reasons that were both real and serious, and Watson was not about to ignore that evidence, no matter how unconventionally it had been presented. The investigation uncovered evidence of emotional abuse and manipulation during Sarah's visits with her father. What began with a golden retriever's dramatic courtroom response culminated in a 3-week investigation that transformed not only the family's future, but potentially the landscape of family court proceedings in Franklin County. Dr. Reed's evaluation proved pivotal. As both a veterinary behaviorist and licensed psychologist, Reed brought unique expertise to the case. Over 5 carefully structured sessions, he observed Lily's responses to both parents in controlled interactions with Sarah. The results were unambiguous. The service animal demonstrates consistent alerting behaviors in the presence of Dr. Reed when court reconvened. These are not random reactions but specific responses to measurable physiological changes in the child: elevated heart rate, perspiration, muscle tension, and other markers of acute anxiety. Most compelling was the evaluation session, where Reed had monitored Sarah's vital signs during separate interactions with each parent. With Sarah's biometric readings remained stable in the normal range. With Michael, even during seemingly pleasant conversation, her heart rate elevated by 28%, her skin conductivity spiked, and microexpressions of fear were documented in high-definition video that Reed presented to the court. In my professional opinion, Reed concluded, these are not reactions that can be coached or manufactured, particularly in a child of this age. They represent genuine fear responses to stimuli the subject perceives as threatening. Michael's attorney attempted to discredit Reed's findings, arguing that children often experience anxiety around non-custodial parents without abuse being present. But his arguments lost traction as additional evidence emerged. Dr. Michaels had obtained court permission to review Sarah's pediatric records, which revealed a pattern of unexplained injuries and stress-related ailments, stomachaches, headaches, sleep disturbances, all correlated with her visitation schedule. Sarah's kindergarten teacher provided documentation of behavioral changes observed after weekend visits, including withdrawal from classroom activities and regression in social skills. Most damning was evidence discovered almost by accident. During the investigation, Foster, the guardian ad, had interviewed Sarah's friend Emma and her mother about at Michael's condo. Emma's mother mentioned in passing that she had been uncomfortable with how Michael spoke to Sarah when he thought adults weren't listening. She had recorded a brief video on her phone of the girls playing, inadvertently capturing Michael in the background, his voice low but audible. "Remember what I told you about keeping our secrets. Smart girls know when to stay quiet." The recording wasn't definitive proof of abuse, but in the context of other evidence, it reinforced concerns about Michael's behavior behind closed doors. When confronted with the recording during his testimony, Michael's carefully constructed facade began to crumble. His explanation, that he was merely referring to a surprise birthday gift, contradicted earlier testimony and struck Judge Watson as transparently false. Throughout the proceedings, Lily remained a constant presence at Sarah's side, her behavior reinforcing the expert's assessments. When Sarah a second time, recounting specific incidents of her father's frightening behavior, the time he'd squeezed her arm until it bruised because she'd spilled juice on his laptop, the night he'd made her sit in darkness for hours because she'd called without permission, Lily's vigilant positioning between her and Michael spoke as eloquently as any testimony. On a bright Tuesday morning in May, 6 weeks after Lily's dramatic courtroom response, Judge Watson delivered her ruling. The court finds compelling evidence that Sarah has experienced emotional harm during visitations with her father, Watson began, her voice carrying throughout the now-packed courtroom. Local media coverage of the service dog case had drawn unprecedented attention to the proceedings. While Mr. has presented himself as a model parent in public settings, the evidence indicates a concerning pattern of controlling and emotionally abusive behavior in private. The court is particularly troubled by the documented physiological stress responses observed in the child when in her father's presence, responses that experts have cannot be fabricated. Watson addressed Michael directly. "Mr. This court is suspending your unsupervised visitation rights pending your completion of a parenting course, specifically addressing emotional regulation and appropriate boundary setting with children. Additionally, you are ordered to attend individual therapy with a provider specializing in controlling behaviors." Michael sat rigidly, his attorney whispering urgently in his ear as Watson continued. Supervised visitation will be permitted twice monthly at the Family Connection Center, with quarterly reviews to assess progress. She shuffled her papers, then looked up again. I want to be clear, mister. This ruling is not intended to permanently sever your relationship with your daughter. Rather, it is designed to ensure that relationship becomes healthy and supportive. Turning to address, Watson's tone softened slightly. Primary physical custody will remain with the mother, with legal custody shared once Mr. has successfully completed the court-ordered programs. The court acknowledges the mother's appropriate interventions in securing therapeutic support for her daughter, including the service animal that has proven instrumental to this case. Indeed, Lily had become something of a celebrity in legal circles. The unprecedented role she had played in revealing Sarah's distress had caught the attention of child advocates and legal scholars beyond Franklin County. Watson had been contacted by judges in neighboring jurisdictions, curious about the protocols she had established for evaluating the service animal's responses. Finally, Watson concluded, I want to acknowledge the extraordinary circumstances of this case. The court commends the role that Lily, the service animal, played in bringing the truth to light. While our legal system typically relies on verbal testimony and documentary evidence, this case reminds us that children who have experienced trauma may communicate their truth in ways that require us to listen differently. As the courtroom began to empty, knelt beside Sarah in the hallway, straightening her daughter's cardigan. "How are you feeling?" she asked softly. Sarah considered the question with the seriousness 9-year-olds reserve for important matters. "A little scared," she admitted, "but also relieved." Nodded, understanding the complex emotions her daughter was navigating. "That makes sense. Big changes, even good ones, can feel scary." Sarah reached down to stroke Lily's golden head. "Judge Watson believed me," she said, wonder in her voice. Yes, confirmed, she did. What neither of them knew then was how far-reaching the impact of their case would become. Within months, Judge Watson would collaborate with legal experts and animal behaviorists to develop guidelines for incorporating service animal evidence in family court proceedings. Sarah and Lily would be invited to demonstrate their communication techniques to a select group of judges and child welfare specialists. The protocol, as it came to be known, would be adopted by family courts in 3 neighboring counties by year's end. For Michael, the ruling represented a jarring confrontation with behaviors he had long rationalized, or whether he would genuinely engage with the therapeutic process remained to be seen. His initial reaction, a furious phone call to threatening further legal action, suggested the path to insight would be challenging. But the strict limitations imposed by the court order created a framework within which change, if he chose to embrace it, became possible. 3 months after the ruling, Sarah's nightmares had decreased dramatically. Her artwork, once dominated by dark colors and threatening figures, gradually incorporated brighter hues and safer spaces. In therapy sessions with Dr. Michaels, she began articulating feelings she had previously been able to express only through Lily's responsive behaviors. On a warm evening in August, sat on their back porch swing, watching Sarah and Lily playing an elaborate game of fetch in the yard of their new home, a modest 3-bedroom ranch in a different school district, far enough from Michael's condominium to eliminate the anxiety Sarah had experienced just driving through his neighborhood. Dr. Michaels had warned that healing wouldn't be linear. There would be setbacks, difficult days when past trauma resurfaced. But as observed her daughter's genuine laughter, the ease in her movements as she raced across the grass with Lily bounding joyfully beside her, she allowed herself to hope. The golden retriever, sensing herself being watched, paused in her play to look back at, intelligent eyes meeting hers in what seemed like shared understanding. Lily had come into their lives as a therapeutic tool, a service animal trained to respond to specific needs. She had become so much more: protector, friend, and ultimately, the voice that spoke what a frightened child could not. In the golden light of approaching sunset, whispered a prayer of gratitude for second chances, for judges who listened carefully, and for the golden retriever who had changed everything with one extraordinary moment of courtroom revelation.